I'm Kate Konechny-Pope, a 2013 graduate of SPS and a member of the She Opened the Door committee. We are excited to announce the launch of this new virtual series intended to bring our community together and highlight thought leaders from across the university. She Opened the Door, Ask the Expert will feature Columbia alumni speaking about their experiences, challenges, and achievements in an interactive setting with audiences from across the globe. Near the end of today's program, we will have an audience Q&A. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit a question. We'll try to get to as many as we can in the time that we have. I am now pleased to introduce our speakers, Lenore Kantor, 93BUS, and Sasha McDowell, 09SIPA and Social Work. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. Maury, do you want to share the slides, and then I'm happy to kick us off?
Sounds great.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. It's great to be here. My name is Sasha McDowell, and I'm an alumni of SIPA and Columbia Social Work School. I'm going to share my career story with you today, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about negotiation, and I'm going to talk about it through the lens of negotiation and mindset, this idea that we can change our narrative and also ask for what we want. Next slide, please. All right, so my story. So I have had two different chapters of my career. Social justice and equity are really what drive me. So those have been the common threads throughout both chapters of my career. So I started out thinking that I was going to become a psychologist. And so pretty early after college, I got a job running after-school programs and summer camps for at-risk youth, thinking I was going to sort of go from there to make this argument to get a PhD in clinical psych. But I got promoted into management, and that changed my career goal. I was very surprised that I loved management, but I loved doing a little bit of a lot of different things. I loved doing some strategy, some budgeting, some fundraising, and really the anchor for me in it feeling like a great fit was running a team. That felt like extroverted psychology to me, and I absolutely loved it. And so that changed my career goal. From wanting to become a psychologist, I decided I wanted to have a dual career where I would run a nonprofit that served either youth or women. And I wanted to have a small clinical therapy practice on the side because I felt like many well-intentioned managers who, like me, were really driven by social justice. I felt like the further they got up the management chain, they became sort of out of touch with what was happening with real folks on the ground. And I didn't want that to happen to me. So I thought, I can protect myself from that happening. If I'm running a women's organization, I'll see a handful of women in therapy. If I'm running a youth organization, I'll see a handful of youth in therapy. So as I sort of continued to work towards that career goal, I worked in a lot of different kinds of environments. I worked in grassroots nonprofit. I worked in corporate, in charitable giving. I worked in a national nonprofit that had won the MacArthur Genius Award for the program model. And I worked in the New York City Department of Education. And in the middle of all that is when I went to Columbia and I did this dual degree in management and clinical social work. And then I had my daughter, and I had her older on purpose. She's that little face on the left. And that, much to my surprise, really changed a lot for me. Flexibility it really went to the top of my list. And I tried to negotiate with my employer for flexibility, and they said, no flexibility at all. And I ended up leaving my job, which was not at all in my plan. And I was very much a planner. And so it really ushered in what I think of as a pretty long career crisis for me. And it felt like a crisis for a few reasons. I think one was it was just so unexpected. We were young, having kids, and had 3 masters between us and really no business being on one income at that point. And I think from an identity perspective, I had worked toward this goal for so long and had, sort of continued to open the doors there. So for a long time, I sort of thought, I'm just going to get the kind of job I've always had, try not to get discriminated against during the interview process by, sharing that I want this flexibility and that I'm a mom. And then when an offer comes in, try to negotiate flexibility. And it just didn't end up turning out that way. I ended up getting some consulting work that paid well and paid the bills. And so but the consulting work was pretty boring. So I decided I'm going to do this consulting work as a way of making money, but I'm going to start a business as a side gig, just as a way to think and learn and grow. I know I want to have another baby, sort of felt my clock ticking and was just trying to think about how can I sort of keep all this together while I grow my family. And then a few years into the business, I decided this is it for me. This is what I'm going to do. I'm officially a career changer. I'm going to run this business. And because I'm a very mission-driven person, the business is about supporting purpose-driven leaders, women, and working parents, so they succeed in their careers and also personally. I think we have somehow decided in the work world that our careers and our personal lives are completely separate, but I don't think they are. I think they're very intertwined. And when I'm working with my clients, whether they want to talk about growing as leaders or making a career transition themselves, family and personal factors are always in the background, whether it's I'm the primary breadwinner, and so I need to make X amount of money, or it's I'm the primary parent, so I need flexibility. So that's how I arrived at making my own career change and starting a second career. My work now falls into 3 buckets. I do coaching with executives and leaders. I work with folks who want to make a career pivot, and I do parental leave coaching. So that involves sort of supporting a woman towards the end of her pregnancy, couple touch points during maternity leave, and then working with her and often her manager to help her successfully transition back into her role when she returns. The second bucket is working on women's initiatives, women's leadership. And the third is teams and culture, which is really around leadership development, conflict resolution, and also diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So negotiation, or sort of asking for what we want, has certainly come up many times for me personally in my career when I'm working for other people, and it comes up now. And so like anything, there's certainly the hard skills around negotiation. And there's also the mindset, or how we show up and our approach to having the conversations that we need to have. Next slide, please. So I just want to start by framing the importance of mindset. One of my favorite facts about mindset is that optimists are less accurate in their perceptions than pessimists, but they live as much as 15% longer than pessimists. So while optimists are living these longer lives, they are often happier, they sleep better, they have lower stress, they get sick less often, and they recover from illnesses more quickly. So I love this example because I think it just highlights the fact that what's happening in our mind is so powerful. It impacts our bodies, how long we live, how we feel day to day. So I just want to begin with this framing around mindset and making this point that it's really powerful how we view things. Next slide, please. So when I think about the nuts and bolts of negotiation, sort of the basics, often when we're thinking about negotiation, we tend to think about salary, although there's certainly many, many things that we will end up negotiating for over the course of our careers. I think one of those nuts and bolts pieces is never giving the opening number. So finding out the range first. And this can be a little bit tricky because it means that sometimes you will be asked directly, what are your salary expectations for this role? And I think the mindset shift there is being ready to answer the question with another question, which can be uncomfortable, which is why I think it's important to sort of wrap our minds around that in advance. And an example of this that I can share from my own career is a mistake that I made early on. I knew about this. I knew it was a best practice, but I hadn't quite prepared myself for it. And so I was asked in an interview once, what's your range? I gave my range. And then a little bit later throughout the interview sequence, somebody else said to me, we've talked to you about the range, you know what the range is. And first I was like, yeah. And then I was like, well, actually, no, nobody shared the range. What is the range? And in that moment, I found out that I had put myself, luckily within the range, but at the very bottom of the range. So I had, for that job, left about $10,000 on the table. I was able to negotiate a little bit more than my initial number, but I did leave money on the table. And then that mistake followed me because in my next role, they calculated salary by taking your salary from your last role and adding 3%. So it's just an example from my own professional history about how important it is to have that mindset really clarified for yourself before you step into the room. Next slide, please. So often we are negotiating for something other than salary. We may be negotiating for flexibility. We may be vying for a promotion, and you really want to follow the same model as for salary. You want to understand what's in place. Because, for example, if you're looking, for some flexibility around where you do your work, but everybody else is already going in 3 days a week, that's just the norms for that workplace, and that already works for you, then there's nothing that you need to negotiate. Maybe instead you want to ask for, I'd love to work 2 weeks remotely every summer. So you just want to understand what the workplace norms are already, kind of like getting that range. So you have a sense of where to enter the conversation. Next slide, please. So I want to take a moment to define what mindset is. A couple definitions that I like are the set of attitudes that we hold and a person's way of thinking. When it comes to negotiating, we want our mindset to set us up to deliver our message calmly and with confidence, despite any nervousness or anxiety that we might feel. And again, mindset is just really about remembering that we have choice. We can be flexible in how we think about things. We can change how we think about things. We can envision new possibilities for ourselves. We have some control over how we think and how we set ourselves up to succeed. Next slide, please. So one aspect of creating a healthy mindset, a strong mindset, is really first getting clear on some of the harmful myths that exist. All of us have internalized a lot of false narratives. And so one of the ways that this can play out for women in particular is we know that often women will apply for a job when they've done 90% of the role already. And men on average will apply when they've done about 50% before. So I think this is a good example for women of having internalized this idea that we have to be overconfident. We have to be overconfident to show up in the first place. So we want to intentionally change that thinking so we feel set up for success, we feel strong, we feel like we can be authentic and proceed in a way that makes sense for us. Next slide, please. So diving into some of the key mindset shifts that I think are really important. Shift number one, ask for what you want. So whether you want more money, you want different responsibilities, you want hybrid work, it's so important to ask for it. Knowing what we want and getting comfortable making personal decisions out of our value system is actually a key piece of adult development. What helps us to grow professionally also helps us grow personally and vice versa. And we are the only ones who can put ourselves first. Sometimes, not always, but for some women that can tug on a feeling of, that makes me feel like I'm selfish. It's not selfish. Selfish is if I am thinking of myself and steamrolling over you and what you want, right? That would be selfish. But for each of us, it's really about getting clear on what we want, asking for it, asserting ourselves. And I think this also includes knowing what our walkaway point is. So again, thinking about my own story, when my employer came back to me and said there's zero flexibility available, that was a walkaway point for me. I've always known, as much as I love running my business and as much as it has turned out to be a surprisingly fantastic second career for me, I would have been retained by my employer had they been willing to negotiate. So it's important to know when you're willing to walk away because you're not getting what you want and what you need. Next slide, please. Mindset shift number two. You're good enough now. You don't need to wait for anything else to be good enough, and you're competent enough right now. So one of the things that I hear from my coaching clients often is this idea of, if I just had X, I'd be ready. Ready is often synonymous with good enough to be successful at this next thing that life has thrown my way. And I've heard all sorts of people say it. I hear people with 2 master's degrees say, if I just had a PhD. I say, if I didn't just have this experience, but I had an MBA or I'd done this, there's always something else. There's always something else that would make us feel more prepared, more confident. So I think that mindset shift is about realizing you're good enough now. Of course, you want to keep learning and growing. We all do, but you're ready now. You have what you need now to ask for what you want and need. Next slide, please. Mindset shift number 3, just taking teeny tiny steps. These big goals that we have are about simply taking a series of very small steps. And when things feel very big, very overwhelming, difficult to envision, we can reduce that overwhelm by breaking big things down. And then I think the work in the moment is embracing mindfulness and staying in the present moment. So for example, you want to ask to work from home 1 day a week, and you want some other remote work. Step 1 is as simple as just scheduling the meeting with your boss. That's it. You've created accountability for yourself. It's on the calendar. Step 2 is just writing out what you want so you're clear for yourself. That's it. Step 3, practicing saying it out loud, building the muscle memory of asking for what you want. And then you're in there, you're having the conversation with your boss. Maybe you feel a little nervous. That's okay. It's okay to be nervous. It's just getting ourselves to take action and moving forward through the nervousness, not letting it stop us. Next slide, please. Mindset shift number 4, letting go of perfectionism. So this is a common one. We hear this a lot as women. I heard a conversation on a podcast a little while ago between Brene Brown and Adam Grant. And so, as many of you likely know, Brene Brown has talked a lot about the need for all of us to embrace vulnerability, which she defines as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And she says, but vulnerability is not weakness. It's our most accurate measure of courage. And so when she had this conversation that I listened to with Adam Grant, she said to him, do you know the number 1 reason why it's difficult for women to be vulnerable? And I thought she was going to say it's difficult for us to be vulnerable or courageous because we're so concerned with making other people happy. But she didn't. She said the number 1 reason why it's difficult for women to be vulnerable is because we've told women over and over again that they need to be perfect. It's a very big ask to ask somebody to be vulnerable when they feel that they need to be perfect. Perfectionism holds us back. So when it comes to negotiation, it doesn't have to come out perfectly. It's about harnessing bravery. Just do it. Ask for the thing that you want. Next slide, please. So shift number 5, mindset shift number 5, flexibility is not a favor. So when it comes to, in this case, a job negotiation, you want to finalize salary first, get that done, checked off. And then it's about thinking about flexibility a little bit differently. It can be easy to feel like, well, they gave me money, they gave me a lot of money or more than I thought they were going to give me. I should let go of this ask for flexibility. Really, FaceTime is an old model. It is not created by and for most of us who are in the workplace today. The ability to do remote work or have a hybrid work setup, it reduces stress. That allows you to be a stronger performer. And it also levels some of the systemic inequities that we see, particularly around gender and race. So often women are doing a lot of extra domestic work. And I know for me and many of my clients, just makes my life easier. If I can be running the laundry while I'm working on, a document, makes my life easier that I need a movement break after working for a long time and I can be loading my dishwasher. So those things matter for folks because they reduce stress and they just make life easier. And we also know that for BIPOC folks, they report experiencing less microaggressions when they don't have to go into the office as frequently. So flexibility really sets us up to be better employees, and it helps employers, retain top talent. So there's a mindset shift that I think is important there to be made. Next slide, please. And the last shift I want to talk about is that discomfort fuels growth. So it's okay and ironically, even desirable to feel uncomfortable. Nobody likes it in the moment, but we have to be able to take action even though we feel uncomfortable. When we're uncomfortable, that is when we're at our growing edge and it's our opportunity to build new skills, generate new possibilities for ourselves. It really creates a whole new world of opportunity for us. So it's important to push through it rather than avoid it. Next slide, please. So as I sort of wrap up my part of what we're talking about today, I want to comment on stories that we tell ourselves. We all tell ourselves stories. These stories, though, can become a little entrenched for us. They become our narratives, and then eventually, at some point in our mind, they become what is true. But we can change those narratives. Changing our narrative allows us to change how we behave, and ultimately, it ends up changing our lives, again, through those teeny tiny steps. We can feel the benefits of those changes, just like the optimists. We can't control other people, but we can control ourselves. So it's worth investing time there. Next slide, please. I want to leave you with a strategy. How do we operationalize all this good stuff? How do we make it actionable? So mantras are great. They're ways of reworking our thoughts, and they can often be really helpful when we have certain stumbling blocks that we come up against again and again, and they're familiar, well-trodden territory for us in our brains. So some of my favorite mantras, and I certainly invite you to create your own tailored mantras, but some of the ones that I like are, I don't need to do it perfectly. I just need to do it. I don't have to worry about the future right now, just going to focus on today. And I don't have to know how. I just have to take one step forward today. Next slide, please. So when you find yourself in these conversations, these negotiations, prepping is helpful. I love it when I see people write their thoughts down. It helps you show up more confidently, more clear. Practicing out loud. It's important. You're building muscle memory by saying it out loud. It's okay to bring notes. Again, a mindset shift. Notes are not, an admission of not being ready. They're actually a sign of preparedness. It's fine to say, wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything, need to refer to my notes, and remembering to pause, taking that moment to breathe. It's okay to take a minute and collect your thoughts and really be intentional about what you want to say next. Next slide, please. And then maintaining your boundaries. You get to define your own boundaries and decide what is right for you. Sticking to our boundaries can be difficult. People like to push, they like to test, but it's important to be clear on what you want and need. When we say yes to one thing, we are automatically saying no to something else. And when we choose to say no to something, it allows us to say yes to something else that we really care about and that we really want. Next slide, please. So I'm going to end with a quote that I really like from a woman named Susan David that I think is a great guide around mindset. And Susan David says, courage is not about the absence of fear. Courage is fear walking. Walk directly into your fears with your values as your guide towards what matters to you. The more you choose moves that are towards your values, the more vital, effective, and meaningful your life is likely to become. Thank you so much. That is it for me for now. I'm going to turn it over to Lenore.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. I was trying to respond to a question that came up, but I'll get to it a little bit more in my presentation. So just give me 1 minute. I'm going to put this, hold on, full screen. I'm going to try and put it full screen. There we go. Okay. So great to meet you all. I'm going to be coming at this from a perspective of empowered communication, because to me, negotiation is almost like a daily way of operating. We are negotiating constantly in all aspects of our life, with our partners, our families, and just going to a local store. So I'm going to help put things in that perspective. I'll share a little bit about my background, what are important elements of communication to be thinking about, this concept of empowered communication, which is really going deeper about how to have your words resonate and be authentic and have the effect and impact that you want. And then I'll get into negotiating strategies a little more. And I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed what Sasha shared, because we did this before, so it's just great to sort of have the complementary stories. So my background is also, I don't know, I think I'm entering Lenore 4.0, could even be 5.0, but I've gone through a number of identity shifts and different backgrounds. And early in my career, actually coming out of undergrad, I worked in the nonprofit sector for a number of years. And I went to business school with the intention of going into nonprofit management. So I also had that idealistic vision of wanting to run a nonprofit. And then when I got to business school, I got introduced to operations management, which at the time was actually very focused on quantitative research and manufacturing, which I had absolutely no interest in. But I took a service angle to that, and it was really about people, processes, and systems. And business school became a launching point for a career in financial services leadership, which was actually the last thing I thought I would ever do. But I had an opportunity to enter a training program at a bank, and I had a very great experience there. I actually headed up a product management function. So earlier in my career, I was building and designing financial technology products, bringing them to market. And then in the second half of my career at this early bank I worked at, I moved into their broker dealer unit. So I got involved in branding. So I transitioned from being on the product side into the marketing and communications role. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go along. But I worked in a number of different financial and technology companies in equities, options, foreign exchange. I worked at a very large wealth management organization. And I had been involved, because I was head of marketing and communication, in multiple transactions, mergers, acquisitions. The last company that I worked for, I helped to take public on the New York Stock Exchange. 6 months later, our business was acquired. So I went from working in an organization, when I started, we were 150 people. Within 4 years, we had doubled. We were 300 people. When we got acquired by Thomson Reuters, we were 50,000. So I went from a very fast-paced, innovative tech company to being part of a very large, conglomerate in some ways. And I stayed for almost a year, but I had one of those breakdown in the bathroom, crying on the floor moments where I came out of a meeting and I just realized I couldn't keep doing the work there. It just didn't feel aligned with me anymore. I don't even remember what the meeting was that I came out of, but I really just had that moment of reckoning where I realized this is not going to bring me fulfillment any longer, and I need to do something that's more aligned. So that was over 10 years ago, and I started my business Growth Warrior with the goal of offering outsourced chief marketing officer services. But I had also gotten trained as a coach before that. And at that time, coaching, particularly in financial services, was actually considered remedial. So my former CEO said to me, Lenore, don't tell people you're a coach. No CEO wants to be coached. That means they have problems. They want a strategic advisor. So my business has evolved in many ways, but I do consider myself a coach. I talk about being really a conscious business coach. I really want to work with leaders who are high achievers, values and mission driven, that are looking to make a positive impact on the world. I do work with emerging leaders, leadership teams. I work with founders and co-founders and their organizations around aligning all aspects of their messaging, positioning, so that they can show up as their most authentic and powerful selves. I'm an adjunct faculty career and capstone advisor for Bard's MBA in sustainability. So I particularly love working with mission-driven leaders who are working to create sustainable change. Like Sasha, we're both members of Columbia's Career Coaching Network. And so my background is working in these very large corporate environments, but I also have training in multiple healing, energy medicine, somatic practitioner. I've done tapping, I lead cacao ceremonies. So I bring a very holistic approach to the work that I do with any of my clients. And I believe that that combination of business marketing strategy, like deep knowledge of the business world, and that intuitive approach helps me bring a very unique perspective in the work that I'm doing, because it's not all about the mind, it's also about the body, the heart, the energy, and you'll sense a little bit about that. So I learned to communicate because I was basically managing stakeholder communications at every company I worked with and for. And this involved dealing with internal communications. What do we tell employees? Sales and marketing. How do we reach out to clients and prospects? The media, journalists, dealing with the government. And, at one point I was managing government relations. We had a PAC. I was traveling to Washington, D.C., dealing with the board, strategic partners, industry influencers, right? So one of the things I learned is you can't say the same thing to everyone. Not every audience cares about the same things. So you always need to know who you're speaking to, because that's going to determine how and what you communicate. And I'm going to share a little bit more about one of the career defining experiences I had early on that was really influential in helping shape how I communicate. So when we're communicating, we really want to think about our intention. Why are we saying something? Are we angry? Are we feeling, outraged? Or are we claiming what we want? Are we trying to express our needs? Are there other things? Like getting clear on what we are looking for is super important. You need to have that in your mind before you know what you're going to say. And then another important thing is how we say it. So I'll get into this more, but when someone's speaking to you, when you sense something is out of alignment, or there's anger or some heavy emotion in their voice, sometimes it's actually hard to listen to what they're saying, because all you're aware of is that you've gotten activated and you're focused on how they're making you feel. So the tone is super important. I'm sure you've all experienced this, where you want to ask someone a question and you can see they're sort of frazzled, and you go ahead and ask it and they bite your head off. So you need to check in on the timing, because when you ask is super important. And then there's also the context. Are you speaking to people not only in the right way, in the right place, at the right time? All those things need to come together. So the perception that we have is the reality, and impact factors into this. So somebody who said something in anger, even if they really didn't mean it, they then need to deal with the fallout of that, not just what they said. So people don't often realize or take responsibility for the outcome of what they're saying. So how we communicate is very important, and the experience that someone has, how we're feeling, how they feel, is more important than the actual words themselves. And I'm sure you've seen this, where you say something to someone, or someone says something to you, and something in the way they say it doesn't align with what they're saying, and all you notice is, God, I don't feel good, or I didn't like the way they said it, right? And you don't even hear what they've said. So I'm just going to share this example with you, and then I'll give you my personal story. So I want to raise, or I'm going to quit. That's option one. I expect a salary increase because my cost of living has gone up and I need this to cover my living expenses. Option two. Option three. Well, John earns more than me, and for that reason, I need to earn at least as much as he does. Option four. I deserve to earn the market rate for this position because that is what it's worth, And that's the contribution that I bring. So you can see that those are all asking for the same thing, increase my salary, but how they're communicated and the rationale and intention behind them is all different. So I'm gonna share, I'll come to my experience in a little bit. So just digging deeper, these are the 7 elements of effective communication. So first you need to know who is your audience, and sometimes we're not aware of who the ultimate decision maker is. And this can be a challenge. So the example I'll share is early in my career, I worked on a super high profile deal. Multiple businesses were being brought together and rebranded. I was the lead on the entire project initiative. I worked with the vice chairman on it. I was working with the CEOs of 5 different business units. We successfully rebranded, came up with a new name for combining these entities. I got us incredible publicity in the marketplace. We won industry awards. So year end comes around, I'm expecting to be promoted because I did a kick-ass job, right? Well, I happen to be working in one business unit. The promotion announcements come out. My name was not on the list. And I was literally devastated. I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. And I went to the vice chairman, and not only was I like emotional sobbing, but I was like, what the fuck, man? Excuse my French. Like, how did this happen? And what I discovered was within the business that I worked in, all of the people at the level that I was looking to get promoted to actually didn't understand the work that I had done that had contributed to this important event. Within the business unit, they didn't understand because I wasn't really dealing with them. I was dealing with people at the senior level. So that was really a wake-up call for me to know always who is it that's going to be deciding and having an influence and impact on any decisions that are being made, because you have to get those people on your side. So knowing your audience, super important takeaway. Second, where are you now? Do you have enough information? Because oftentimes we think we want something, but we actually haven't done our homework. So what I learned from the experience I had was, if I had really done my due diligence, I would have known I needed to build relationships with all these other senior executives in order to get their support and advocacy for my promotion. But I didn't know that. I only learned it after the fact when I didn't get promoted. The good news was I did get promoted a year later because I did the work. But these things are important to know. So the third point, what do you actually want? What are your non-negotiables? This is not about, well, I should have this, right? Why do you really want it? What do you have to have? If you want a job and it's going to give you certain experience and it doesn't pay as much as what you think you want, if the experience is valuable for you, maybe the salary is less important. If you need to hit a certain salary number and that is most critical to you, then that's what you focus on, that's your minimum bottom line. And if they can't meet you there, you're going to walk away. That's critical to know what's essential. When is it needed by? Understand the timing. Why is the change needed? So what could a win-win look like? How is the person you're in a discussion with also going to benefit? Are you going to be happy? Are you going to work harder? Are they going to raise their profile? Whatever it is, understand what other possibilities are available, because sometimes there are different options open to you. There's not always one way of getting things done. And if there is only one possible outcome, and that's what you're committed to, you need to know that. And if you're not going to get that, then you need to be prepared to walk away. And then you want to have your game plan, how you're going to make it happen. So the communications framework, and I'm happy to share this with people afterward if there's an interest, is What is the outcome you want from the interaction? Why is it important? Who needs to know or be involved? When is it happening? How can you align your actions and which alternatives are possible? So in my example, I wanted to be promoted. I wanted to be recognized for my successful completion of that project and how it impacted the business. And if I had to do it again, the who would have been not only my manager, but every member of the leadership team that I needed to influence. I needed to discuss it before the annual review. So waiting until December was way too late. Often these decisions are made months in advance. So I should have gotten a jump start on it in like an August timeframe, teeing up those conversations in September when the leadership and management decisions were being made in October. Right? So these allocations of fundings, promotions, those things are typically discussed months in advance. So you need to have a sense of what the timeline is for your business. I would have been scheduling one-on-one meetings and engaging regularly with key influencers. And then emphasizing, not only did I need the new title, but I wanted a salary increase as well. So you always want to prepare. There's two aspects. There's the internal work, knowing what you want to say and why, developing your mindset, as Sasha alluded to, understanding your emotions. If you're super triggered and geared up and you can't approach things calmly and confidently, it's actually going to undermine you. I've done this work with clients. I have a client who basically got a piece of paper saying she was only getting a 3% salary increase when she thought she was getting 10% or more. And she basically sat on it for a month fuming. And as we talked it through and gave her her game plan, she was resigned. If this doesn't get resolved, I'm leaving the organization. She went into her boss and found out it was a typo. They had made a mistake in the system output, and she really was getting the 10% increase. She sat for a month in anger and anxiety over something that, had she resolved her emotion, she could have gotten addressed earlier. So practicing what you want to say and the counter responses can also help you. And then on the external side, you want to have that data. What can support your argument? Salary.com is a great resource. What are peers earning? Knowing your audience and what they need and what's important to them, and the timing is helpful. So there has been research shown that we focus almost 70% on how we feel when we experience what people are saying, and 30% on the actual words. So you do want to manage your mindset, but there's this other part of your body, which is how you present, how you physically show up. Are you connected to what you feel? Are you grounded? Are you able to look at the person you're speaking to? All of these things matter. So in order to be authentically aligned and have the most empowered impact, what you say, how you say it, and what you mean all need to align. Because when you're authentic, you're clear, you're believable, you will resonate and be in integrity. We know when people are not being truthful. We feel the cognitive dissonance. They seem disconnected. What they're saying falls flat on us, and it seems disingenuous. So I just wanted to leave you with these few takeaways, but you might want to consider the next time, what is it that's super important to you that you need to communicate? Who do you need to speak with about it? Why is it important to you? And then what's in it for them and for you? Can you find a win-win? Where and when would be the ideal time to have the conversation? How will you approach them, and which options are available? And I do have a worksheet I can share. So just to wrap up, rethinking our approach, knowing what we want is super important, and being aware of what we're saying, what we're doing and what we mean? Can we bring those three things together so that our intention and impact can be most successful? Here are my contact details. I'd be happy to connect with anyone who's interested in exploring more coaching. And with that, I will turn it back to the group. So it's great to connect with all of you.
Thank you, Sasha and Lenore. I think we have time for a few quick questions. I appreciate that you both have already answered some in the Q&A box already. We have a question. It's salaries and roles seem to be very rigid at my giant company, especially lately with no raises in the past year. How do you navigate that?
Lenore, you're muted.
Yeah, I can take that one. I worked at very large organizations, and I have a sense of how these things work. Basically, I don't want to say you're screwed, but sadly, if you're at a very large organization with these formalized structures, you really have limited opportunities for upside potential because they're giving a standard 3% every year. In fact, I worked at a company that they didn't even do that annually. Sometimes they'd move you on to a 2-year cycle. So in order to get promoted or to break out of that, you really need to justify why a bigger salary increase is warranted, and you need to go through channels and you need to prove it. And unfortunately, sometimes you need to leave an organization or have an offer in hand in order to negotiate and have them match. That's just the reality from what I've seen.
Thank you. Next question. How do you find out who is in charge of promotions, timelines for promotions, if it's not communicated proactively in your company?
I mean, I would try to talk to colleagues. I would really try to think about who your resources are internally in terms of your key relationships and do some investigating to see what you can find. It's always difficult when things are not shared transparently. So doing your due diligence behind the scenes.
Thank you. We have another question that says, do you have any body language tips or comments?
I can certainly take this one. I think your body language is a reflection of your own clarity and internal alignment. So if you have a lot of emotional stuff that you have not yet processed and it's not resolved, it's actually going to be reflected in your body. So the most important thing, I don't want to say fake it till you make it, because that doesn't always work. It's doing your homework emotionally, psychologically, and somatically within your body to make sure that you are clear in what you want, why you want it, and how you show up. This is why working with a coach is super important. I mean, I worked with coaches in my career and that helped me. And then I became a coach. This is the work I do with people. It's really understanding and kind of working through everything that's coming up so that you know you're worthy, you can stand in your truth, and there is absolute power in that. And when you can bring that forward, it's actually undeniable. People can either meet you there or not, but you know what's true for you. So that would be my response to how to sort of do that. And then maybe some practical things. You can meditate, you can do breath work, anything that helps you center yourself, but being centered in your own space in the moment is not the same as being in a stressful situation where you need to prepare. This is where practicing and rehearsing and role playing can also be super valuable.
I want to add on to this one. I love this question. So I second everything Lenore said. I think the only thing I would add is I would look for opportunities to increase self-awareness, whether it's how do I feel in this moment when I'm communicating? Or how did I feel, looking at it retrospectively, how did I feel in that moment? How do I think I came across? And what I love about this question is this is an area where you can get some feedback in your private life. You can certainly ask folks at work who you trust. how did it feel during your conversation? Did I come off as congruent? Was my communication consistent in terms of my verbals and my nonverbals? But you can also ask your friends this. You can ask your partner if you have one. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for practice here and for getting feedback from other people. It's a great question.
Our next question, if you work in an environment where salary is not shared among colleagues, how do you learn what may be equitable if you feel you are undercompensated? Sorry.
Yeah, I definitely find salary.com to be a valuable resource where you can check. It lets you pick your location. You can even go on LinkedIn and find comparables. I actually have a story. One of my clients is struggling right now. She works at a large consulting firm and she was underpaid. Her whole class was, and then one of the managers found a way to increase the salary of incoming people because they weren't attracting enough talent. So she's been at the organization 2 years. People coming in now are going to be earning 30,000 more than she is. And she's furious, right? And everyone in her class is the same. So they've been taking it to their manager, and taking it above that, but it's in the HR people's hand. So some of this stuff is navigating the politics and it's kind of tricky. So you just need to find the resources, stand your ground. Hopefully your organization will do the right thing. But if not, you kind of need to decide, are you going to stay and put up? Or are you going to look elsewhere and leave? And that's always your choice. And you hate to have to leave if you really like the organization. But sadly, the story Sasha shared, I had that same experience. When you're in an organization, if you've come in at a low rate, it's kind of hard to get to a higher rate. Sometimes you have no choice but to leave, even if you don't want to. And then the balance there is, some organizations will counter you only if they see you've gotten an offer, and some won't. And that's just, that depends on where you're working.
One quick add-on. I'm sorry, can I say
Go
one
ahead.
add-on? I've seen many of the executive women that I work with. Some of them started a spreadsheet, anonymous, sharing salary according to title and industry. So if anybody wants to spearhead that, you can do it anonymously, share it with your networks. It's a great way to collect data on your own.
That is a great segue into our final question for today. If you are undervalued and underpaid at your company and leave to reset, what are 2 things you would do to reset yourself?
Yeah, I think for me, the most important thing, and I do this literally with almost all my clients, is to release the past. We carry around these bad, toxic, traumatic experiences, and they actually damage our ego. I worked with a very senior woman. She did not get promoted. She became a managing director at Goldman Sachs, but the place she worked before treated her badly. And I said, let's clear that out. Like, you don't want to carry any of those bad feelings from the past into your new role. So I would say that's number 1. Number 2 would be to have a 30-day, 90-day game plan for entering your new role. What is it that you want to accomplish so you can be successful and hit the ground running?
The only thing I would add on there, I would definitely do what Lenore said for part 2. I love the 30, 60, 90 day. If it were me personally, I would want to start with a personal adventure / reset. Traveling, learning a new hobby, cooking, doing something in the gym, something to give myself a bit of a break from work, some time to heal, some time to just dive into my own personal experience. And then I'd want that second chapter to be much more reorienting around, what do I want out of this next chapter? And as Lenore said, what's that 30, 60, 90 day plan?
I love the reset. That's how, definitely vacation.
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Anna Rodriguez, co-chair of the She Opened the Door Committee, for our closing today.
Thank you. What a wonderful and informative event. Thank you so much to our presenters, Sasha and Lenore, for sharing your expertise and experience with all of us. I'm Anna Rodriguez, an alumna from the School of Engineering and Applied Science and co-chair of the She Opened the Door Leadership Committee. I want to share a special thank you to our event leads, Kate and Cassie, for their leadership in making the kickoff event for the Ask the Expert series such a success. We hope you'll consider volunteering with the CAA to help get fellow alumni and students involved in meaningful initiatives such as this one. You can find out more from the link in the chat box or going to alumni.columbia.edu at a later date. Most importantly, continue to be part of our community and She Opened the Door. Make sure to tell fellow Columbians in your network about us and help get the word out. Our next She Opened the Door Ask the Expert series will be next month, Friday, September 8th at noon Eastern. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful day and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Please do feel free to reach out. I know I'd love to connect. And thanks, everyone at Columbia for hosting this opportunity.
Thanks all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.